Okay, so we have our animation blueprint and we're ready to create some state machines. We're going to right click and type state machine and select add new state machine. This is going to be the basic ground locomotion state machine. So we're going to call this ground locomotion and we're going to connect it to output pose. Every frame, whatever is returned by this state machine will be fed into the output pose, which will ultimately drive the animation for the Bellica character mesh. Now double click on ground locomotion to enter into it, and we're going to add some states to this machine. Drag off entry and click add state, and this one's going to be the idle state. Now from idle, we'll drag off, create a state, and call this jog start. We're going to have an idle animation, and whenever we start running, we're going to start the jog start animation, which is the beginning of the running animation. And then from jog start, we'll go into the running animation. So add a state here called run. When we're finished running, we're going to do the jog stop animation, which is kind of slowing to a stop. So add a state called jog stop. From jog stop, there'll be a transition back to idle. But we also want to have transitions from jog stop to jog start in case we switch rapidly between starting and stopping our run. So drag one up from jog stop to jog start and drag one down from jog start to jog stop. Now we need to add animations into each of these states, and we need to set the transition rules for each one to determine the logic that will decide when to change from one state to another. For the animations, let's double click on idle. And Lieutenant Bellica came with a whole bunch of animations, as you can see in the asset browser here. These are all animations that came with the Paragon asset Bellica, and it shows you here the path where you can find them in the content folder. For idle, let's go ahead and search for idle. And there's a whole bunch of idle animations. We're going to use idle relaxed. Click that and drag the pin into output animation pose. Now if you're curious and you want to see what idle relaxed looks like, double click on it and we'll see here that we're brought to the animation tab and it's playing this idle relaxed animation. Holding Alt and left clicking allows us to rotate around so we can see her idling. So that's the idle animation. Up here we can click back on Blueprint to get back into the animation blueprint. Here we're shown how deep we are into our state machine. We're in ground locomotion and we're in the idle state. And we can get back out of the idle state by clicking here on ground locomotion. And now we can add some animations to the other states. Double click on jog start. And we're going to search for jog. And we're going to use this jog forward start. Click and drag that in and connect it. And we can take a look at jog forward start by double clicking it. And you'll see that it's basically Bellica beginning to run from a standing position. So she starts off idle and then she begins running. Now let's click Blueprint to get back into the blueprint and get back out into ground locomotion. Double click on the run state. For run, we're going to use jog forward. And again, we can double click to see jog forward, and it's just her running forward. Back in the blueprint, go to ground locomotion, double click jog stop, and for this one, we're going to use jog forward stop. Connect it, and you can double click to see that it's basically her running and coming to a stop. Okay, back in the blueprint, back into ground locomotion, we've added animations for each of our states. Now we need to add transition rules for each transition. These decide whether or not we should transition from one animation state to another. For idle to jog start, let's double click on it. And if we're idling, we want to start jogging if our speed is greater than 0. Remember, we created a float called speed in the anim instance class. We can access that here because it's blueprint read only. So we can type get speed to get that speed variable. Now we can get a greater than comparison node and compare this to see if it's greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, then we want to transition. But that's not the only condition. We also want to make sure that we're not in the air. Remember, we also created a Boolean called b is in air, and we can get that by typing get is in air. Remember, in C++ there's a b, but Blueprints is smart enough to hide that b from us. We want to make sure is in air is not true, so let's drag off and type not, and we're going to use a not Boolean. This will negate it. It's basically the same as putting an exclamation point at the beginning of an expression in C++. It flips the truth value. So this will be true if is in air is not true. Finally, we want to check to see if we're accelerating. And we do have that Boolean b is accelerating that we created in the anim instance. So we can say get is accelerating and get that bool. So we have three conditions that we want to be true. Speed is greater than 0, that has to be true. Is in air negated, which means not is in air, that should be true because we don't want to be in the air. And is accelerating should also be true. All of these should be true. So we can create an and. Type and we'll use and Boolean. Now it can only take 2 pins, but we can add a pin here by clicking add pin and plugging in is accelerating. This will only return true if all 3 inputs are true. So that's exactly what we need. So that's our transition rule for idle to jog start. Now let's go back to ground locomotion. Now from jog start to run, we want to transition automatically. So click on the transition rule, but don't double click it. We don't want to go inside. We just want to select it. And we have a details panel here for the transition rule. Now in the details panel, you'll see an option that says automatic rule based on sequence in player state. Check that, and this will ensure that we go from jog start to run as soon as the animation is done. Now it's going to blend between these two based on our blend settings. Now these are values you want to tweak, but I've messed around with this and found that 0.8 works pretty good for this blend, so we're going to use a value of 0.8 for the blend duration. Now for the transition rule from run to jog stop. We simply want to transition from run to the jog stop animation if we're no longer accelerating. So enter this transition rule and get is accelerating. Negate that with a not Boolean node. So if is accelerating is false, then we can transition to jog stop. Now from jog stop to idle, this is also going to be an automatic transition. As soon as jog stop is done, we can go back to the idle state. Unless, of course, we're running again, which we would go back to the jog start. But we'll do that transition rule after this. From jog stop to idle, click the transition rule, and check automatic rule based on sequence, player, and state. Now, after some experimentation, I found that a good duration for this blend is 0.4. Now, from jog stop to jog start, we simply want to make sure we're accelerating. If we are accelerating, we don't want to go back to idle, we want to go back to jog start. So double click this, right click, and get is accelerating, and plug that in. Now back to ground locomotion. From jog start to jog stop, double click this transition rule, and we want to go from jog start to jog stop if our speed is 0. So let's get our speed variable, and we'll use the comparison node equal float to see if it's equal to 0, and if it is, we can transition from jog start to jog stop. So let's compile this and hit save. Now we have a basic state machine for our ground locomotion. Let's close out of the animation blueprint. We can close out of the animation editor, and let's hit play. We'll see right off the bat that we're in the idle state, so that looks good. Click in the viewport to gain control. Now notice that our character is turning along with the controller, just like our camera and camera boom are following the controller. That's okay, we'll take care of that later. For now, start moving around. Now, if you start moving forward, we'll see that we get our jog start animation playing. But there's a little bit of lag. She's sliding across the ground. It doesn't look great, but that's okay. We're going to take care of that very soon when we trim the animations. So this is going to take some tweaking. But the good news is, as soon as we start running, the character changes animation states. So if we keep running, you'll see that we're in the jog forward animation and it looks relatively normal. We've just started and we haven't tweaked this yet, so it doesn't look anything close to polished yet, but we'll get there. In the next video, we're going to trim the animations so that it looks better when transitioning from jog start to jog forward and jog forward to jog stop. So we'll see you in the next video.